Here's what's coming up on the world today. Passenger arrested for opening plane door during South Korea flight. Teens hand themselves in to police over Sydney fire. Plus, Iran and Belgium agree to free individuals imprisoned in each other's countries. Hello and welcome to The World Today on Channels Television. Thank you for joining us. I'm Anne Nwawadu. Let's begin in South Korea, where the country has launched its homegrown Nuri space rocket. The third flight of the Nuri rocket marks a major step in South Korea's nascent space program as the country seeks to become a key player in an intensifying race with its Asian neighbors, with 3 more test launches expected until 2027. The ministry called off a planned launch earlier this week, citing technical problems involving a system that controls a helium tank, which they say were fixed after overnight work. South Korea successfully launched the Nuri Aim-2, the second test last June, placing working and dummy satellites into orbit, while the third test was designed to load and launch a commercial-grade satellite for the first time. And still in South Korea, a man in his 30s has been arrested for opening the emergency door of an Asian Airlines flight as it was landing. All 194 passengers survived the flight, which landed safely, but with its door still open at the Daegu International Airport. Some passengers fainted, while others had breathing problems and were taken to hospital. According to authorities, the man was arrested upon landing. Flight OZ8124, an Airbus A321-200 jet, had taken off from Jeju Island about 11:45 local time. As it was landing, about an hour later, a male passenger opened the emergency door while the plane was still 250 meters from the ground. Witnesses recounted that flight attendants were not able to stop him because the plane was about to land. However, police said the suspect had so far not given any explanation for his actions. And a quick check on the weather now. Torrential rains following a prolonged drought caused streets to turn into fast-flowing rivers in towns along Spain's Mediterranean coast. Fire services said the worst affected areas were the towns of Benicassim, Opersa, Del Mar and Canbans. But they say also that they carried out 3 rescues and provided pumping services on 27 occasions. State Weather Agency warned of accumulated rain of 12 centimeters over 12 hours today in the province of Castellón in the Valencia region. While the rains had caused chaos and economic damage, they had also been welcomed by many in Spain, which had been on track to register the driest spring since records began in 1961. Meanwhile, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, says they expect an average number of storms with up to 9 hurricanes this year across the Atlantic Ocean. NOAA forecasters estimate 12 to 17 named storms, of which 5 to 9 of those will develop into hurricanes, and 1 to 4 will become major hurricanes during the June 1st to November 30 season. Just last year broke a 6-year string of above-normal hurricane seasons, with the strongest that year being Hurricane Ian, which scored 150 miles per hour winds and hit Florida and South Carolina.
NOAA is predicting a near-normal 2023 Atlantic hurricane season. Specifically, there is a 40% chance of a near-normal season, a 30% chance of an above-normal season, and a 30% chance of a below-normal season. For the range of storms expected, NOAA calls for the following: 12 to 17 named storms with top winds of at least 39 miles per hour. Of these, 5 to 9 are forecast to become hurricanes with maximum winds of at least 74 miles per hour. This includes 1 to 4 major hurricanes ranking as Category 3 or above, and winds of at least 111 miles per hour.
But we are also in an active era, and having a strong El Nino with an active era and such warm SSTs, I've only seen it one other time in the historical record. There's not a lot of analog evidence for it. So it's definitely kind of a rare setup for this year. And that's why our probabilities are not 60 or 70%. They are a little bit to reflect that uncertainty that all of our, combined a couple hundred years of experience doing tropical analysis with the team. When we looked at it, we were like, wow, there's a lot of uncertainty this year in the outlook. So that's why we have those probabilities and the ranges the way they are.
U.S. President Joe Biden said he has had several productive conversations with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in their standoff over the federal government's debt ceiling, adding that staff negotiators were continuing talks. Speaking at the White House, Mr. Biden said Republicans are pushing for steep cuts that will increase wait times for Social Security claims and cut teachers, police, and border control agents. Mr. Biden said the negotiations with McCarthy are about the outlines of what the budget will look like, not about default. And it's about competing visions for America.
I've made clear time and again defaulting on our national debt is not an option. The American people deserve to know that the Social Security payments will be there. The veterans' hospitals remain open, and that economic progress will be made, and we're going to continue to make it. Default puts all that at risk. Congressional leaders understand that, and they've all agreed there will be no default. And it's time for Congress to act now. Now, I want to be clear that the negotiations we're having with Speaker McCarthy is about the outlines of what the budget will look like, not about default. It's about competing visions for America. Under my administration, we've already cut the deficit by $1.7 trillion in our first 2 years. But Speaker McCarthy and I have a very different view of who should bear the burden of additional efforts to get our fiscal house in order. I don't believe the whole burden should fall on the backs of middle class and working class Americans. We can reduce the deficit both in short term and long term with a combination of spending cuts on programs that help big oil and big pharma by closing tax loopholes and making the wealthy pay their fair share. I've reduced the deficit, I said, $1.7 trillion in my first 2 years without raising a cent and raising taxes above anyone making less than $400,000. The economy is growing. The only way to move forward is with a bipartisan agreement, and I believe we'll come to an agreement that allows us to move forward and that protects the hardworking Americans of this country.
A Mississippi family demanded a police officer be dismissed and charged with aggravated assault for shooting an 11-year-old boy when police responded to the child's own domestic disturbance call at his home. Adrian Morey, who called police at the request of his mother, was unarmed and following instructions from a police officer, Greg Capers, when Capers shot him in the chest. The family's attorney, Carlos Moore, said the boy had called police at the home after his mother, Nakala Morey, was threatened by a man at 4 a.m. local time. But Capers escalated the situation, and Moore called for body cam video to be released and objected to Capers being placed on paid leave pending the investigation.
He was like, "Come out with your hands up." At that moment is when my son came out. To come out with their hands up, but you're shooting. I don't understand. I don't want to die. That's what he was saying. While I was on the ground, I said, "You're not going to die, baby. You're not going to die. Just keep talking."
Over in Japan now, authorities say they arrested a 31-year-old man in a rural area for suspected murder after 4 people were killed in a rare shooting and stabbing incident involving a 12-hour standoff with police. According to the police chief, the suspect is the son of the head of the Nakano City Council. He adds that the suspect's mother and aunt were in the house with him, but they escaped on their own. Shootings are extremely rare in Japan, where gun ownership is tightly regulated, and anyone seeking to own a gun must go through a rigorous vetting process. Two 13-year-old boys have handed themselves in to police after a fire destroyed a 7-story heritage building in central Sydney. The building went up in flames yesterday afternoon, requiring about 100 firefighters to extinguish the inferno. Police believe the other teens were involved in the incident and they have asked them to come forward. 15 people were sleeping in the building at the time of the fire, and 13 of them have been accounted for. However, at least 70 residents have been displaced from the surrounding buildings, with an exclusion zone expected to stay in place for 7 days. The militant Al-Shabaab group carried out an attack on a Ugandan troops base of the African Union Transition Mission in Bula Maria district in Lower Shabelle region in Somalia. That attack, which began shortly after morning prayers today, started with a large explosion believed to be an explosives-laden vehicle. Bula Maria is about 110 kilometers from the capital, Mogadishu. Residents reported that after the big explosion, 2 more explosions occurred in the camp before a fight started between the Ugandan troops and the attackers. Al-Shabaab said they captured the camp and then killed dozens of armed ATMIS soldiers, but there has been no independent confirmation of the group's claim. ATMIS also says its forces are currently assessing the security situation in the area, but no word has been heard from the Somali government regarding this attack. Ugandan Army spokesperson Felix says that Kenya's Daily Nation with the military was probing the attack, and he blamed the foreign insurgents for the raid without giving further details. French judges have charged 5 soldiers for not assisting people in danger over the deaths of 27 migrants trying to cross the Channel in the small boat in November 2021. The sinking was the worst disaster on record involving migrants in the narrow seaway separating Britain from mainland Europe. Authorities have said that 9 people were placed in custody in the probe into the tragedy, but only 5 of them were formally charged. In the wake of the accidents, France and Britain traded blame. A French migrant charity filed a complaint shortly after the tragedy, saying that migrants called both French and British authorities, but they were only sent help when a French fisherman raised the alert more than 10 hours later. Iran and Belgium have agreed to free individuals imprisoned in each other's countries in a deal facilitated by Oman. According to a statement, the Omani Foreign Ministry said the people were transported from Tehran and Brussels to Muscat at preparation for their return to their respective countries. However, Belgian Prime Minister Alexander De Croo said in a statement that aid worker Olivier had been freed. Iranian state media repeated Oman's announcement without offering further details. Climate activists are making headlines in Germany again. Well, this week, German police conducted nationwide raids on locations associated with the Last Generation, a climate activist group that uses civil obedience and protest to push the German government towards tough climate policies. They are now facing criminal investigation by prosecutors in Germany. The methods of the group's protest and the subsequent raids have led to a big discussion. For more on this, we are now being joined by DW's Warda Imran in Berlin. Hello, Warda. Thank you for joining us. Please tell us about the Last Generation group and about the investigation they're facing.
Thanks for having me. Last Generation is a climate activist group that's present in Germany, Austria, and Italy. See, they're known for their bold protest styles. And now the German police conducted raids on their location, some of their houses. It's part of an investigation, a larger investigation that the group is facing. These raids actually violated a lot of the members' privacy. Somebody said that they entered their house and they were asleep. So it would actually become a big deal. Maybe you've heard about the Last Generation before. Perhaps you came across pictures or videos of them. They protested last year and also this year in museums by attacking artworks. They are also known for gluing themselves to main roads and airways. Their protest methods are civil disobedience, and these methods often constitute small crimes. In 2022, the group performed over 250 road blockades in Germany. So now many normal citizens faced a lot of disruption, maybe because of these protests. That's the reason German authorities say they started an investigation into the group. Now, one of the main accusations is that members of this group, the Last Generation, organized a fundraiser on their website, which they used for, quote, further crimes. The group raised 1.4 million euros, and other accusations include, for example, intent to damage critical infrastructure. So to be investigated in Germany as a criminal organization is a serious label, and there are serious consequences that members could face.
And Warda.
So one of the main demands is that Germany just do more in their fight against climate change, follow the Paris Agreement. They say the government is not doing enough and perhaps not fast enough. And they say that the government is taking the world to a climate hell with the foot on the accelerator. So generally, more action from the government. But more specific demands include a speed limit on German highways, which are famously known for having no speed limits, the reintroduction of a subsidized public transport ticket, and an introduction of a citizens' assembly, where they say more voices, more local voices should be part of the climate change policy making.
And for the German public who have faced disruptions in activities from these demonstrations, what is their response?
Well, so climate change is one of the biggest concerns for Germans. Annual polls over the last years have reflected that. Even a poll conducted very recently, last November, said that close to 60% of all Germans have climate crisis at the top of their concerns. But now observers are seeing that perhaps these kind of protests could be a risk because people could be agitated because of the disruptions. 8 out of 10 Germans said they disliked the method with which Last Generation protested, but not the reason behind the protest. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz called the methods nutty or bonkers. So political reaction has been a bit intense. But other climate groups have expressed sympathy. Overall, a lot of people say the raids were disproportionate to the protests.
All right. Thank you very much, DW's Warda Imran in Berlin, for your contribution on the World Today. We're now in Sudan, where fresh clashes between the military factions erupted in the capital Khartoum just 2 nights ago, threatening to derail the fragile week-long ceasefire agreement reached between the two warring parties. The state broadcaster building of Odmoran had been caught with gunfire during hostilities yesterday. Under the truce, the parties agreed to facilitate the delivery and distribution of humanitarian assistance and restore essential services. But both sides have issued statements accusing each other of violating the ceasefire and reiterating that they will continue to abide by this agreement. Residents who remain in the city have been suffering water and electricity cuts, as well as lack of medical services and supplies. While the conflict is also resulting in an increased amount of waste, which is already taking an environmental toll and posing a health risk to the citizens. The U.S. State Department's warning that a ceasefire monitoring mechanism on Sudan has detected possible breaches of this truce agreement, including observed use of artillery, military aircraft and drones. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller told reporters that the United States has continued private engagement with both sides of the conflict, adding that Washington will not hesitate to use all tools available to hold the parties accountable.
place with the agreement that was signed over the weekend, detected possible breaches of the agreement on May 24th. These included observed use of artillery and military aircraft and drones, credible reports of airstrikes, sustained fighting in the heart of the Khartoum industrial area, as well as clashes in Zalingi in central Darfur. So we have continued to see violations of the ceasefire. We have continued private engagement with both sides through the Ceasefire Monitoring and Coordination Committee. We are monitoring the conflict, including compliance with the terms of the ceasefire.
Meanwhile, the United Nations Refugee Agency is racing against time to relocate thousands of refugees in the border areas of Chad to safer areas before the onset of the rainy season, as more people continue to flee neighboring Sudan. At Gangor, which is one of the several places along the Chad-Sudan border where refugees have been gathering, workers from the United Nations High Commission for Refugees are already putting refugees in groups of family units. At the Gaga refugee camp, it remains difficult for the UNHCR to know exactly how many refugees are here due to the camp's proximity to the Sudanese border, which means that new refugees arrive daily. The UNHCR has set a daily target of relocating 500 people to the Gaga camp, but not everyone is willing to leave the area, with many of them hanging back because their family members have not yet managed to cross into Chad.
When we are doing the registration, we take note of family members who are still in Sudan, who are not yet in Chad, because as long as they are not in Chad, UNHCR doesn't have any responsibility, because they are not refugees. They are still in the country in Chad. But we take mention of that in case they come, and during the registration of these newcomers, we also ensure that we try to understand exactly where is the family members, what are the other family members, a mosquito net, a blanket, a jerry can, a kitchen set, a solar lamp, to ensure that they start life afresh in dignity.
We deploy in midwives, we make sure that they have dignity kits, but we're making sure that they have emergency reproductive health kits so that we can address their needs.
Well, as South Sudan grapples with multiple challenges, Nicholas Haysom, the Secretary General's special representative and head of UNMISS, is asking political leaders to galvanize momentum in peace processes so that free, fair and credible elections can hold on time. Speaking at the press conference in the capital, Juba, the top UN official in the country emphatically outlined the vital need to fully implement the current roadmap, which he says is already behind schedule. On its part, UNMISS, as mandated by the UN Secretary Council, is continuing to protect civilians, ensure security of displaced persons, and establish temporary bases around conflict hotspots.
The constitution-making process, electoral legislation, standing up the necessary institutions and structures, as well as creating the environment to support robust political competition, require tangible measures. And the scale of importance of what remains to be done does not leave room for inaction. We still see 2023 as a make or break year for this nation if it is to fully implement the peace agreement. I was profoundly alarmed that our human rights team has recorded at least 22 civilians killed in Warrap through extrajudicial executions. The deployment of these courts has enabled justice to be administered to some of the victims of human rights violations and abuses, and just this week, the SSPDF's Yei General Court Martial officially opened at the Yei garrison. We want, as UNMISS, to be part of the solution to the challenges facing South Sudan.
Crash.
Crash Bandicoot.
Mi papá, que saca mi...
Dancing, jokes and smiles flooded the streets of downtown Lima as clowns marched through the streets to celebrate Peru's Clown Day. The colorful participants interacted with spectators lining the streets, sometimes even hugging them or just trying to steal a smile. One clown called Rafito said that clowns bring joy in difficult situations. Well, a variety of looks were on display, as you see on your screen right now. And from large colored jackets and painted faces to those dressed as video game characters such as Mario or Crash Bandicoot.
Para payaso, acá lo tienen como un insulto, como una...
Well, don't forget to put a smile on someone's face this weekend. This is where we draw the curtains on the world today for this week. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Mwawadu. Please stay safe.